Hi, everyone. I'm going to talk to you about something I just recently learned about, which is the Roseto effect and what this small town from the 1930s and 40s in Pennsylvania can teach us. So, it turned out that in the 1950s, physicians in the small Italian immigrant town of Roseto, Pennsylvania, made a remarkable observation. Residents of Roseto were dying of heart attacks at a much lower rate than in nearby Bangor. In fact, the risk of dying from a heart attack was nearly 50% less. Was it their diet? Well, no. It turned out that they were cooking their food in pig lard, eating sausages and pasta, drinking wine, and researchers could not find a significant difference in their diet, their rates of obesity, and their rates of smoking compared to neighboring towns. Well, was it their genetics? No. It turned out that when residents of Rosetta moved to other towns in the United States, and it turns out that even in the 1960s and 1970s, those same residents in Rosetta had the same rate of heart attacks and dying of heart attacks as the rest of America. It turned out that the only significant difference they could find was that this Italian community was very tight knit. They had multi-generational households with elders living with their children and grandchildren, high degree of respect for their elders, strong religious and community ties, and egalitarian social values. Just let that sink in for a moment. Social connection led to a lower mortality rate from heart disease. This finding became a phenomenon known as the Roseto effect, by which a close-knit community experiences a reduced rate of heart disease and extended lifespan. But Roseto isn't the only place that this has been observed. In 2010, Juliana Holt-Lundstad and her colleagues published a large meta-analysis of almost 150 different studies that included 300,000 plus people. And they looked at a variety of social measures of social connection and social relationships, including marriage status, whether you lived alone, the size of your social network, and how you perceived your social support and your perceptions of loneliness. And when they pooled all their results together, it was incredible. They reported a 50% increased likelihood of survival for participants who had stronger social relationships. And this wasn't just one meta-analysis. In 2023, Rionato and colleagues published a meta-analysis of 36 different studies that included 1.3 million people. And when they put all their results together, they found a 33% higher mortality associated with social isolation. So how could it be that social connection leads to better physical health? There are different mechanisms that have been proposed, including healthy behaviors. So we know that socially isolated individuals are more likely to drink and smoke and be less physically active and eat poorly. And in contrast, people with strong social support are more likely to engage in healthy behaviors such as regular exercise, eating healthy, and avoiding harmful substances. There's also biological mechanisms that are thought to be at play, which includes being socially isolated leads to chronic stress, which leads to elevated cortisol levels, increased sympathetic nervous system activity, which can lead to hypertension, insulin resistance, and visceral fat. In fact, the Jackson Heart Study in Mississippi followed African Americans and found that African Americans in this community who had stronger social support had less incidence of hypertension. So keep in mind, all of these studies I've been talking about, including the analysis of the Rosetta community, they were not randomized studies. These folks were not randomly assigned to live in social isolation versus a close-knit community with all else being equal. And like the data we have on smoking and VO2 max and their association with health, these data can only tell us about correlation, not causation. But the consistency and the strength of the associations are hard to ignore. So what does this mean for us? So I would argue that if we want to optimize our physical health, let alone our emotional and mental well-being, we need to prioritize social connection. Physical health is not only about sleep, nutrition, and exercise. It's about prioritizing relationships and investing in community. There are many ways to go about doing this. For me, it involves a weekly phone call with a good friend. It involves Wednesday potlucks with nearby families. It involves riding with my mountain biking group every month. There's different ways to build social connection, but it starts with making it a priority. I'm going to end with a story about my 80-year-old mom who is absolutely tough as nails. I'm waiting for her at this time to come out of surgery. She called me earlier this week in agonizing leg pain, laying in bed alone with her front door locked. I was an hour away. By the time I got to the house, one of the neighbor's kids had climbed in through the window, unlocked the door, and allowed people inside. And when I got there, two different neighbors and my mom's brother were at her bedside, having given her pain medications and emotional support. We took her to the hospital. We discovered she had fractured her hip. Now she's having hip replacement surgery and will begin the long process of rehabilitation. And that process of rehabilitation will be made easier by her community. Her sister is going to live with her for a few weeks. Her neighbor is going to make sure she walks every day. And her friends and family will provide her with food and emotional support. This is the power of social connection.